Okay, so good morning everyone and welcome to today's Let's Talk Dairy. Today we're joined by Marion Beecher, who's very conscious that she's been talking to you several times in the last couple of weeks, but very good stuff to be covered again today, I suppose, in a very appropriate time of year. Obviously, calving really just beginning to get going in earnest around the country now. Marion's just going to cover a little bit around the nighttime calving. So obviously that's the big pressure point for people in reality, is that there's a big day's work to be done every day, and then there's possibly work going on during the course of the night as well. So some people are fortunate enough that they may be in a position to have a night calver or so forth, but scale obviously is important in that sense. So for your standard family farm kind of scenario that we're dealing with the maybe 90 to 100 cows to calve, that's maybe not a luxury that people have. So maybe ways of dealing with that, I suppose, and we'll take questions as we go along, obviously, as well. And then the other part, I suppose, this time last year, COVID was something that was happening in China, and we weren't overly concerned about it completely at the time. To be fair, I suppose, from my experience of dealing with Teagasc, they were getting worried about it, because obviously they were seeing that there was trouble in China in terms of getting product in and out and so forth at an earlier stage. So we ran into lockdown, obviously, on the 13th of March last year, and our 6-week calving was over at that stage, so the peak was gone. And I suppose we put, like Francis Quigley and Marion and Martina would have done a bit of work in terms of putting pieces of information together for people for standard operating procedures in case anybody got sick. But thankfully, in a lot of cases, farmers were kind of avoided it because we were in our own form of isolation anyway during the calving season anyway. But unfortunately, as you know, things have taken off over Christmas across the country, and while this time last year you would have had to go looking for COVID nearly to get it, it's probably going to find you potentially if you're meeting people, and that's obviously more common as well at this time of the year now, because vets coming into yards, different people coming into yards. So the risk is higher for people, and trying to mitigate against that risk is one thing, and then to deal with it if it actually does happen. So I know from my own perspective, I'm finding that I know more people that are after contracting COVID now than at any stage during any of the previous lockdowns. So Marion's going to cover the night calving piece, I suppose, which is going to affect everybody, and then look at the COVID scenario as well, and we'll discuss it as we go along, and as I said, throw in the questions into the Q&A there, and we'll handle them as we go along as well. So Marion, I'll hand it over to you. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks everyone for having me. So look, again, Stuart, I suppose we're kind of conscious as well, you know, as you said, we're coming into the calving season. We're probably not going to run this for too long either this morning, because there's a lot of stuff going out on farms, and more time than listening to me rabbiting on about something that there's probably jobs that need to be done. So hopefully these tips will help you with those bits of work going on. So as you said, Stuart, at the start, the whole nighttime calving, I suppose, is one thing to look at. And I just have one slide in it. I want to just really simply go through it. So this is work that was done by David Gleason back in the early 2000s, and it's looking at, does the adjustment of silage feeding time alter calving time? So they locked cows out of access for feed between 10:30 in the morning until 8:30 at night. And what they found then was that there was a reduction in terms of the number of cows calving, the percentage of cows calving between 12:30 at night and up until 6:30 in the morning time. So it didn't eliminate it completely, but it did reduce the number. So there was 9% less calvings during that 12:30 to 6:30 period of time in the morning. And in terms of gestation length, assistance, everything else was not significant, but there was a significant reduction in the number of nighttime calvings. And I suppose the key thing about this is how it's practiced. And there's a video on the Teagasc website that will give you more tips in how to do it in practice. But the key thing is having enough feed space. Practicing is for about 10 days before the cows are due to calve. And also, I suppose the mechanisms in terms of locking out cows out of feed. So for a lot of farmers, it's, I suppose we're not encouraging farmers either. And I suppose this is a key thing, to go out and start up the tractor at 10 o'clock at night and feed cows at that time. What we'd be trying to say is that, practical way of doing this maybe would be, feeding cows in the morning time, and then putting like an electric fence or something, some barrier, or locking cows out of it in the morning time and then opening up that gate in the evening time, or else, you know, having the blocks of silage out there and then being able to just push it up then later on in the evening. So I suppose, you know, there's practical solutions. I suppose none of us here, I suppose, are advocating, as I said, that you go out and, you know, farmers be, you know, starting up tractors at 8:30, 9:30 at night time. It's all about, you know, doing it, but doing it safely, and I suppose taking a practical approach to implementing this on farm. And I suppose it does work. It doesn't work for every farmer, but as I said, the key things are to do it, you know, 10 days to 2 weeks before the cow is due to start calving. And as I said, then it's about, you know, managing how to lock off the cows out of feed. And I suppose the key thing as well is having the cows grouped by calving date, I suppose, when they're in the shed. So,
yeah, that's a good point, I suppose, Marion, and Joe would have spoken about it last week as well in relation to transition cow management and so forth, that the feed space is critically important. So I suppose in terms of your other hat that you wear in terms of plan, do, review, it's something that people could look at now after the calving season this year, if they find that they've had a lot of night calvings to deal with and it's put them under pressure. We'll say, is feed space an issue? Can they increase the level of feeding space? And there's many advantages to it. Obviously there's a cost associated with it, but just the whole access to feed. And Joe would have been saying last week that he'd be looking for closer to 3 foot per cow when they're in the close-up period to calving. So the yards some yards don't lend themselves to what you're suggesting there, obviously. So but people may be in a position to make amendments or adjustments to them for 2022. It's a bit early to be talking about it, but in reality, I suppose it's just to get that thought process into people's heads as well, to try and think of, as they go through this calving season, to be noting the things that aren't going well for them potentially, so that they can act on them, and to think about that early on in 2021 rather than on the 4th of February of 2022 that I meant to do X or Y, like to correct that.
Absolutely. And I suppose, look, I know of a few people who are tight on feed space, and it's, you know, they don't have the luxury of being able to lock cows out of you know, out of feed for, you know, since 10:30 to 8:30 or whatever it is. So what they do is, you know, they last job before they might start milking, or in the evening time, you know, at around 6 o'clock, 5:30, 6 o'clock, they'll push out fresh feed and then just push up the feed in the morning time. So because that fresh block is coming out later on in the evening, that's when the cows will start coming out and doing the most of their eating. And then it's supposed to, you know, have the quieter, shyer cows coming out there earlier in the morning. So that's one, I suppose, workaway around. Again, you're not going to reduce it down. You're not going to eliminate night calvings completely, but you're just going to minimize the numbers, or, you know, even if you can. And I suppose the other thing is, you know, the study looked at it from locking off cows from 8:30 or 10:30 to 8:30. You know, you can adjust that time as well, depending on what works for you.
Yeah, so actually just on that now, there's a question there from Sean McArdle. What was the deciding factor to the time that he thinks maybe is the 10:30 a little bit late for closing off the access to the silage?
Yeah, I'm not sure is the answer to that. As I said, it was a study that was done a good few number of years ago. I'm not sure what the reason was. Maybe they looked at it to try and minimize it to minimize the number of calvings between that 12:30 to 6:30 period. So maybe that was a deciding factor in going for 10:30. So maybe if you locked it off earlier, we'll say, of, you know, stopping feed cows from 8:30, then maybe you're going to slightly adjust this 2 hours earlier as well.
Yeah.
To be honest, I'm not sure the full. I'd have to go back and check it, to be honest. Yeah, it's a good question.
The other thing maybe it might be just in terms of practicality. I know it should only be a straightforward thing to do, and if it is being implemented, but just to allow time for people to get their jobs done in the morning maybe, and then you go and lock them back and might put in the fresh feed. I think that's the key thing that people have to take away if you're going to go doing this. Like, the feed still should get put in within the normal working day, and it's only, as Marion said, giving them access to it or pushing it in. So if you do have to start the tractor, it's only just to skirt down along the barrier and push in the bit of silage rather than actually feed the silage.
Absolutely. So it's trying to minimize that number of, you know, doing that work at late in the evening, I suppose. And it's, you know, all this research is about, you know, adapting it to your farm and to your particular set of circumstances. This is what worked in the research setting, but that's going to be the difference to what your farm is set up like, and, you know, who's available, and, you know, what facilities, etc. you have on the farm. So, you know, adapt it to the farm, I think, is the message.
Yeah, I think there's a very simple, straightforward way of doing it. Is probably a bar across the feed barrier potentially, and it can work in two senses. Then John Maher is a big fan of keeping cows back from silage, obviously, before they go out to grazing in the morning, and in particular, and it could work in that sense as well in a tricky morning, just to let cows back to the cubicles, but not have access to the silage. So it can double up to serve two purposes potentially as well. Like, and it doesn't have to be expensive. A bar across the feed barrier is relatively cheaply done. I suppose for people that are handy with welders and a bit of drilling and stuff, they'd probably be able to do it themselves, no problem. Like,
Exactly, and that's the thing. It doesn't have to be a really fancy mechanism or anything. It can be, cheap and cheerful and really still very effective. But that's the key thing, is just, making sure that they don't have access to it where possible. Obviously, as I said, feed space is the absolute, critical point here, that you have to have enough feed space to be able to do that effectively. So I think that's all to put it on in terms of nighttime calving. But I suppose the other, I think, key thing for me is that, we're coming into probably the busiest period. It is the busiest period on spring, spring calving farm, sorry. And I suppose, what are the practical things that you can do now that, coming into the period, that to try and make things run a bit more smoothly. And I suppose, I'm conscious that, you're in the midst of calving now. You're not going to have time to make massive changes or, build on or do any kind of, major works, but there might be a few little things that you might be able to do that might just make things easier. So, you can't overestimate, certain things like having, properly hanging gates. Again, a simple, quick, temporary solution, like this barrel, it just makes things much easier, and being able to manage getting cows out, one person getting drafting, we have to draft cows out for calving or moving calves or whatever it is, even getting a simple bucket for the frontal loader if you're having to move a lot of baby calves from house to house. Okay, again, this is probably not practical if you're not set up for this time of the year, but again, something to think about next year, that if you're wanting to get calves out early, obviously, provided that the weather is good and that they're at the right age, but you still need to give them some bit of a lie back. A mobile unit like this may work. Again, group feeding, big feeders might work as well, or a simple trolley instead of having to lift buckets. There's probably things that you can buy that you can slightly adapt even just for this year, just to get you over, and just make things that little bit easier. And again, like Stuart said, if you're handy with a welder, you can fashion up something for, this is actually a mobile fridge, and it's a little camping stove on the side, so it's for heating up colostrum and storing the colostrum in the fridge, so that it's always there to hand. And then simply just going back to the lean and visual management, and having everything in its place, and a place for everything and everything in its place. Putting all the equipment for calving on a simple board. Very easy to see then if you're missing a tagger. You can always add in a piece then, for your BBD tags, a little holder for BBD tags, etc. But having all those things just simply put up. And then I suppose the other thing is, communication. And I suppose this kind of ties back into what I'll go on to next about managing COVID and tips for managing that, and how to communicate with people. So obviously, if you're trying to keep your distance from people, and you still need to communicate, how is the best way to do it? Well, one option is to use whiteboards, and simply having whiteboards in the calf shed, even in the dairy, in the parlour, etc. All help, I suppose, improve communication, and just writing simple up notes. You can have a two-way communication without having to be on top of each other. And then simple things like, just even numbering, calf pins. You can just take out all the confusion, rather than saying, feed calves in the second pin from the top. Rather than just going, if you had it say, right, feed pins and calf in pin 4. There's absolutely no confusion then if you tell them to feed calf pin 4 or whatever it is. It just makes things much easier. And then I suppose the other thing to look at is, once a day feeding from 4 weeks of age. So again, plenty of research out there to show that it has no negative effects in terms of growth rates or weights after, and calves do perfectly well once they're fed from 4 weeks of age, which may again just take the pressure off that if someone on the farm does come down with COVID, or if you're short staffed or whatever the reason, it might just provide you with a little bit of flexibility, I suppose, coming into the busy period. And again, I suppose longer term, potentially looking down the route of using an automatic calf feeder just to save a bit more time and make things easier. So I suppose then just to go on to COVID, that was the other thing Stuart asked me to talk about today, and I suppose how to manage that. And I suppose, look, you know, we all know how to prevent COVID. It's, you know, wearing your mask, the 2 meters, and hand hygiene. And I suppose, you know, those are absolutely critical, as well as, you know, each of your co-ops will probably have guidelines in terms of milk collections and stuff like that, and what to do. So I suppose follow the public health guidelines and follow the co-op guidelines. And then I suppose, in terms of tips then as to how to manage it, so you know, looking at, you know, the people on the farm. So I suppose you have to come up with a plan B. So what happens if you or someone in your family does come, you know, contacts the virus or has to self-isolate or isn't available for whatever reason? So what do you do in that scenario? Well, you know, ensuring someone who's familiar with the farm is available if someone needs to self-isolate. And again, you know, as you said, Stuart, at the start, having your standard operating procedures, and you know, there are a few on the Teagasc website. If you Google them or search them on the Teagasc website, they are there and available to download and alter for your farm. Or, you know, use your discussion group or advisor. You'd be surprised who would have some the standard operating procedures. And then I suppose the other thing to look at is actually, you know, your bulk tank. You all get a operation procedure or a manual with the bulk tank, and it might be just a case of taking that and shortening down and putting it up and leaving it in the parlour. So having those, you know, instructions available for people if necessary. And then I suppose what to do if there's a number of people working on the farm. Well, you know, operating a staff rota and trying to minimise the number of people on the farm at the one time. Obviously, you know, busy period, you're going to need a certain number of people on the time, people on the farm at one time. So then it's working the rota and combining that with allocating specific people to specific tasks. So ensuring that, you know, one person is doing one task, so they're minimizing the number of, you know, the number of equipment, etc., that they're coming in contact with, and they avoid mixing people with equipment. And then I suppose, you know, it's important as well, I suppose, to keep in contact with, you know, your discussion group, your friends, your advisors, your neighbours, and just, you know, you're not alone. Everybody else is in the similar position as yourself, and, you know, other people have tips or tricks that might just make things a bit easier for yourself. So just to keep in contact, and, you know, you'd be surprised what you might find by talking to somebody else. And I suppose the other thing to think about is that, you know, school's off, you know, there's a lot more children spending time on farm, and I suppose, you know, that can be a really positive thing in terms of getting them involved and seeing them, you know, being able to feed calves and teaching them about where their food comes from. There's also an increased risk of accidents. You know, farms are dangerous places. There's big machines. You know, springtime is a busy period. You know, getting that slurry, getting that fertilizer, cows calving, people tired. There's an increased likelihood of accidents happening. So I suppose we need to be cognizant of that, and I suppose putting measures in place to ensure that, you know, children and everyone are kept safe on farms. So then, as I said, you know, about the whole social distancing, you know, we know keeping our distance from people is one way to avoid picking up COVID. And I suppose this goes into, you know, only having essential people on the farm, and then, you know, maintaining social distancing with any essential callers. So like of vet, AI technicians, lorry drivers, contractors, you know, stock buyers, relief milkers, etc. So, you know, minimize the need to talk to these people close by. So communicate using your phone or whiteboards. And, you know, if you don't need the sales rep to be in the yard, you know, now's an opportune time to be able to put them off because of the risk of transferring COVID to one another. So keep the distance, you know, only essential people, and I suppose communicate using technology and phones and whiteboards. I think one farmer back in last March or April used to have a buyer come for his cows, and instead of meeting him that he used to do and show him around, he's put all the cows for sale in a particular shed, and the buyer would just come in and take them and go. They never had to meet and just talked over the phone. So again, you know, it's a simple practical tip. that might work for your farms. So then again, as I said, going back to the hygiene, absolutely essential. So, you know, having hand detergents and plenty of paper towels available for drying hands, and I suppose having these in multiple places on the farm. So, you know, in the parlour, maybe in the calf shed, and particularly, I suppose, maybe in the workshop where people are going to be, you know, touching equipment and sharing equipment, and, you know, cleaning all surfaces, you know, that different people are coming in contact with, such as, you know, tractor steering wheels, door handles, etc. And I suppose this is, you know, in the ideal scenario, one person would operate one tractor, but that's obviously not going to be practical. So, you know, even by leaving a set of wipes or hand gel within the tractors and getting people into the habit of just wiping down as they're finished using the equipment is just a simple way of getting that, and maybe having a little paper like waste bag as well in the tractor, so that once you're finished the wipe, that you can just put it into the plastic bag and then dump that regularly enough. And again, I suppose wearing disposable gloves and changing regularly. And again, you know, most people are used to wearing gloves in the parlour and making sure that they're kept clean. So, you know, wearing gloves is important, but also, you know, keeping those gloves clean, whether it's in the parlour or outdoors, is really important. And the idea of, you know, changing clothes daily or washing clothes at, you know, 60 degrees is important in terms of killing any bugs or potential bugs. And I suppose, look, these are all just good hygiene tips anyway. And, you know, in terms of, you know, minimizing any kind of calf, you know, scours and stuff like that, that if you can, you know, minimize that and just changing your own clothes daily, you're not going to be bringing any bugs back into your own house either. So it's just, I suppose it's good practice. It's just the habit, getting into the habit of doing it. And then just finally, yeah, sorry, one last slide, Stuart.
Okay.
So just to finally, you know, again, conscious, you know, don't want to keep people on too long today, but there is plenty of resources that are available. So in terms of, you know, managing colostrum cows, that could be a really simple tool in terms of just how to manage colostrum cows, and some tips there that people might have seen. So there's a video there, and just, you know, about keeping them in a separate group at the end. Again, so it just means that there's less likelihood of getting, you know, colostrum milk back into the tank. Standard operating procedures, as I said, so are on the Teagasc website. Padraig O'Connor has done some brilliant fact sheet in terms of tips for milking during COVID, which again is on available to the website. And again, Teagasc have opened up the COVID helpline for farmers on the number there, and it's available, you know, in the morning and the afternoon, Monday to Friday. And also the IFA have a really good resource. It's, if you Google "Have you got a plan B?" and they've got a checklist and like a form to fill out in terms of list of key contacts, etc. To fill out and have available in case, you know, as I said, you need a plan B. And then I suppose the other thing is, you know, coming into the busiest period, things are hard enough without having to deal with a, you know, global pandemic and potentially any, you know, hear about potential weather issues that might be coming up next week. You know, it's important to look after yourself and your own mental health as well. And again, there's a really good website there in terms of, you know, tips and things to do about, you know, getting away from the farm even for, you know, a few minutes or within your 5 kilometers, I suppose, these days, but at least, you know, seeing somewhere different, and just, you know, getting exercise, eating well, resting. I think those are, you know, key tips to, you know, everything is easier when you're well rested. Everything is impossible, and it seems like the end of the world is coming when you're tired and stressed. So I think rest is as good a tip as I have for today's anything. So that's it, Stuart. A very brief overview and a quick run through it.
Very good, Marion. I suppose the other thing is, if people do feel overwhelmed, it's not something I'm overly comfortable talking about, to be honest, but it's great to just take a deep breath. It just steadies your mind a small little bit too. And I think people shouldn't underestimate the power of that quick phone call just to any one of your close friends or anything. As you said, you mentioned the discussion group, but people that you're in contact with all the time, just give them a quick ring and they mightn't be able to talk to you there and then, but sure, you can talk to them maybe later on again. And it's just important to keep in touch with people, because there'll be less people floating around maybe, or there should be less people floating around. The other thing is, I suppose, we underestimate the fact, or we kind of probably rely on the fact that we're working outdoors maybe as well, and think that we're going to be immune to COVID because we're outdoors, but we probably should. I don't know of any, it's very rare that you can do any veterinary procedure in conjunction with a vet and be 2 meters away from them if your help is needed. So I think people should just be aware that mask is obviously a requirement at that stage. And you're not only trying to protect yourself, but you're also trying to protect your vet as well, because obviously they're going from farm to farm. They could potentially become a super spreader if they were to contract it. And it's not like that people go down with this, really. There's a lot of people floating around that are only a small bit under the weather. And most farmers will be of the scenario that even if they are under the weather, they're going to keep plodding on, because it is the time of year that you just have to pull on the boots and kind of try and keep going. And I know one person that said that they just thought it was a case of the man flu in relation to their husband saw, and it actually turned out to be COVID. So just to be conscious of that. And I suppose the hygiene, Aidan Ahern actually said it the day that he was on with us, that they had a little squeezy bottle in the tractor just to sanitize people's hands, and it was just connected onto the door with probably cable ties or something like that. So there's very simple ways. Again, it doesn't have to be crazy. The other thing is just maybe one person doing the tractor work rather than having multiple people using it, and just to be smart, I suppose, and to be cautious. And look, I think the bull tank drivers, they have a difficult job as well, but it's still nice to talk to them when you can see them, but just stay back, because the pump will be running to suck the milk out of the tank, and the tendency is to go close to them, to talk to them. Just try and step away from the pump, and if you want to have the chat with them, and ideally maybe just wear the mask in that scenario as well. So just to be conscious, I suppose, again, that colostrum mob, Joe spoke about it again last week in terms of how it's good for cow management as much as anything else. But if you have that group of cows that are identified as not being suitable for the tank, it's going to make it an awful lot easier for somebody who has to potentially come in at short notice, and that they know that there's an issue with that bunch. At least they're not looking out for a cow in every row that's coming in, so it can make things an awful lot easier. And it just makes things so much easier for people in general to have that separate group of those cows that need that extra bit of attention, and cows that aren't going to be going to grass and all those. So it comes back to that feed space thing again at the start. You need that feed space to be able to do that. So people should be thinking about that for the future. And if you don't already have it. And I suppose finally then, just as Marion said, people can get overwhelmed with there's so much to do. But in reality, if you can just stop for 5 minutes, maybe if you are overwhelmed with it, you'll be surprised how much it will clear your head and just think out. I think again, I mentioned Tom McConnell a couple of weeks ago. Tom, just what needs to be done. When you're, like you said, Marion, when you're tired and under pressure, everything needs to be done. But what really needs to be done is probably what you have to think about. So there's some jobs there that can wait a couple of days. It doesn't all have to happen today. So just the whiteboards are great for getting what needs to be done. Write it up on the board. You can put a little star against what needs to be priority. This can be just for yourself. It doesn't have to. You don't have to do this for communicating with people necessarily, but it helps obviously. So just there might be 10 things to be done, but the 10 things don't necessarily need to be done today. Identify what is important to keep the show on the road today, and what would be nice to get done. And if time throws itself up, cows calving, as my own vet says, they don't know in the case of human medicine when a person is going to have a baby, so you can't say exactly when a cow is going to calve either. So even though your ICBF report could tell you you're going to have 10 cows calved today, there might only be 2 cows calved today, and the opportunity comes to clear out the calf shed or whatever. It's important in terms of the hygiene aspect of the calf house, but if it doesn't get done today because 10 or 15 cows calved today, well, so be it. It'll be done tomorrow. So just, I suppose, don't be hard on oneself either. People are probably their own worst enemies in that sense. And then again, that whole tiredness and pressure scenario just doubles up on that kind of a scenario. So just take that breath, make that phone call, and just don't be hard on yourselves. You're all doing a very good job for the most part as you go along anyway. So we'll leave it at that. I suppose thanks, Marion. Marion has shown a good number of resources there, so just don't forget about the Teagasc website, and credit to Padraig and Francis and yourself and Martina as well for all the work that you put in there, and to the milking machine companies which offered up the standard operating procedures as well there last year. So that's there for people, and that's something that people should have in place anyway, in spite of a global pandemic. it's useful to have a procedure to how to work the machine. There's an awful lot being carried in people's heads. And when you have somebody like students in on the farm, maybe helping out, now they mightn't be around as much this at the moment, but your own family may be helping out on the farm. If like communication is the problem, and I think the numbering of the pens and stuff like that, it's like what calves are left to be fed, 2 and 4. It's very simple. There's no mistaking that. What calf is left to be fed, like you said, Marion, the one that's 2 up from the far wall, like I just had an experience of that many years ago when I was milking for the Farm Relief in terms of a communication as to where the cows were to go next. I didn't get it right. Farmer couldn't understand how I didn't get it right. I couldn't understand how he wanted them to go into the field that he suggested that they should go into. So it's all about communication. So just everybody take care, be safe, and try and avoid getting this COVID situation on your farm. And thanks to Marion. And we'll see you next week. Hope to cover a piece on the grass side of things, but Beast from the East is potentially on the way, according to Marion when we were talking beforehand. So maybe grass might have to be postponed, but we'll still talk about it next week anyway. So we'll talk to you next week. And thanks again, Marion. Thanks, Patrick.